I can't marry someone with no future," the groom declared, abandoning the altar as wedding guests erupted in cruel laughter. Maria stood motionless in her simple dress, devastated before 200 mocking eyes. But as the whispers grew, the earth trembled. 100 black government vehicles surrounded the venue. Doors flew open and 1,000 Marines marched in perfect formation, saluting as one. "Major Rodriguez, it's time to reclaim what's rightfully yours." The morning sun barely filtered through the tall windows of Riverside Gardens as Maria Rodriguez smoothed her simple white dress one final time. At 28, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the nervous energy coursing through her veins. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant but understated style, no flashy jewelry adorning her neck, just the raw flush of anticipation on her cheeks. Marcus Sterling stood at the altar in his pristine tuxedo, his face twisted with something between panic and disgust. The son of Congressman David Sterling, Marcus had grown accustomed to privilege and power. His family's political connections stretched through every corridor of Washington, and he expected deference from everyone around him. The wedding venue buzzed with 200 guests, their voices creating an undercurrent of expectation mixed with barely concealed judgment. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across faces that carried the smug satisfaction of the politically connected elite. These were people who measured worth in campaign contributions and social standing. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she held her bouquet of simple white roses. She had no family present, no proud parents beaming from the front row. Her past was a carefully guarded secret, buried beneath years of deliberate obscurity. To everyone watching, she was Marcus's mysterious fiancée, a woman with no apparent background or connections. The officiant began the ceremony with traditional words that seemed to mock the tension crackling through the air. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Maria and the expectant faces of his family's political allies. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the venue's controlled temperature. As the vows approached, whispers began rippling through the assembled crowd. Guests leaned toward each other with barely suppressed commentary about the bride's unremarkable appearance and obvious lack of social prominence. Some wondered aloud how she had captured the attention of such a well-connected young man. Then Marcus spoke the words that would shatter everything. His voice carried across the silent venue with devastating clarity, each syllable designed to inflict maximum humiliation. The microphone amplified his cruel declaration, ensuring every guest heard his public rejection of a woman who had trusted him with her heart. The bouquet slipped from Maria's fingers, white petals scattering across the marble floor like fallen snow. The rehearsal dinner the night before had been the first warning. It was held at the Sterling family estate, a sprawling mansion with marble columns that gleamed under imported chandeliers. Maria had worn a simple gray dress, no jewelry, her hair loose but neat. She didn't belong in that room of silk gowns and tailored suits, and the guests made sure she knew it. A woman in a sequin dress, her lips painted crimson, leaned toward her friend and whispered loud enough for Maria to hear. An orphan. Really? How does someone like her even get invited to something like this? The friend, a man with slick back hair and a Rolex that caught the light, chuckled. Marcus slumming it, I guess. Maria stood by the dessert table, a glass of water in her hand, her face calm but her grip tight. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was her shield. A young woman barely out of her teens with a designer handbag slung carelessly over her shoulder approached Maria at the dessert table. Her smile was all teeth, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. You must be so excited, she said, her voice syrupy. I mean, marrying into the Sterling family. That's like winning the lottery for someone like you. The crowd nearby snickered, their glasses clinking as they watched. Maria's fingers paused on her glass, the water trembling slightly. She looked at the girl, her gaze steady, and said, "A miracle's only needed when you doubt what's real." The girl's smile froze, her confidence cracking, and she hurried back to her friends, muttering about Maria's nerve. The room buzzed, but Maria turned away, her shoulders straight as if the words were just wind passing through. Congressman David Sterling swept through the room, his American flag pin gleaming like a badge of superiority. He stopped near Maria, his voice low but sharp. "My son could change his mind any time. You know, this marriage is an opportunity, not a guarantee." Maria met his eyes just for a moment and nodded once. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. Sterling's lips pursed and he moved on, his heels clicking like a countdown. Across the room, Marcus's ex-girlfriend Vanessa, a tall blonde with a smile that cut like glass, leaned into a group of women. "She's a climber," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "No family, no name, just clawing her way up." The group laughed, and Maria's jaw tightened, but she stayed still, her eyes on the floor, counting the tiles to keep herself steady. As the ceremony began, the whispers grew louder, more cruel. Maria stood at the altar facing Marcus, her bouquet trembling in her hands as conversations barely concealed behind silk fans and gloved hands filled the air with venom. The guests had positioned themselves like vultures, waiting for the perfect moment to feast on her humiliation. A man in a navy blazer, his tie loose from too much champagne, snorted loud enough for several rows to hear. "What's she even doing here? Look at that dress. Clearance rack special." A woman with diamond earrings that caught the light leaned forward eagerly. "She doesn't belong. Never did." Her voice carried the satisfaction of someone witnessing a long-awaited downfall. Marcus shifted uncomfortably at the altar, sweat beading on his forehead as his family's expectations pressed down on him like a weight. His mother, Catherine Sterling, sat in the front row wearing pearls like armor and an expression of barely concealed distaste. She had made her feelings about this union clear from the beginning. The officiant's words seemed to mock the tension crackling through the venue. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Marcus and Maria." But even the traditional phrases fell hollow, performed for an audience that had already decided this marriage was a mistake. Behind Maria, she could hear the rustle of expensive fabric as guests leaned into each other, their commentary growing bolder with each passing moment. "Did you see her at the rehearsal dinner? No class whatsoever. Doesn't even know which fork to use for the salad course." Another voice chimed in with false sympathy. "Poor Marcus. His father's political career will suffer from this association." Maria's hands tightened on her bouquet, the stems pressing into her palms as thorns might, but she didn't flinch. She had been taught to stand tall, to hold herself with quiet strength that didn't need words. Her parents, long gone, had left her with that much discipline and dignity, a spine that wouldn't bend even when the world tried to snap it in half. Marcus's best man, a young lawyer named Bradley who worked for the Sterling family's political machine, smirked as he watched the proceedings. He had never understood what Marcus saw in this nobody, this woman with no connections, no family money, no political value. In his world, marriages were strategic alliances, not romantic entanglements. The photographer, a professional hired to capture what should have been joyous moments, instead found himself documenting the cruel theater unfolding before his lens. The moment came like a thunderclap, splitting the artificial serenity of the wedding ceremony. Marcus stepped back from the altar, his face twisted with panic and disgust, and spoke the words that would echo through the venue like a death knell. "I can't marry someone with no future." His voice carried across the silent space, amplified by the wireless microphone clipped to his lapel. The guests erupted in gasps, then nervous laughter that quickly turned cruel and vindictive. Cell phones emerged from purses and jacket pockets, their cameras trained on Maria's frozen figure like weapons. The clicking of camera shutters mixed with whispered commentary as 200 of Washington's elite witnessed what they saw as inevitable justice. Maria stood paralyzed in her simple white dress, the bouquet slipping from her nerveless fingers. White rose petals scattered across the marble floor like tears she refused to shed. Her dark eyes remained steady despite the humiliation crashing over her in waves, her military training keeping her spine straight even as her world collapsed. Marcus threw down the wireless microphone with theatrical disgust, the device clattering across the marble with a sharp electronic squeal. His face was flushed with the righteous anger of someone who believed he was escaping a terrible mistake. Behind him, his family nodded approvingly, their relief evident in their relaxed postures. Congressman Sterling rose from his front row seat, his political instincts kicking in as he began damage control. This was exactly what he had hoped would happen, a clean break that would preserve his family's reputation and political future. His wife Catherine smiled with cold satisfaction, her pearls glinting in chandelier light. The wedding photographer continued clicking away, his professional demeanor masking his shock at the unprecedented drama unfolding before his lens. These images would become evidence of Maria's public humiliation, documentation of her social destruction at the hands of Washington's power elite. Vanessa, Marcus's ex-girlfriend, sat in the third row with barely concealed glee. She had predicted this outcome from the moment the engagement was announced. A nobody trying to climb above her station was bound to fall, and the height of her attempted rise only made the descent more spectacular. Bradley, the best man, stepped closer to Marcus with supportive solidarity. This was the right decision. His expression seemed to say, the smart choice that would protect everyone who mattered. Political careers had been saved by Marcus's cruel but necessary rejection of this social climber. The venue filled with the sound of rustling fabric as guests shifted in their seats, some craning their necks for better views of the devastation. The ground beneath Riverside Gardens began to tremble with a low, rhythmic vibration that made the crystal chandeliers chime like wind chimes in a storm. Guests looked around in confusion, their cruel laughter dying as something far more powerful than their social cruelty approached the venue. The rumble grew stronger, a deep bass note that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Outside the tall windows, shadows began moving across the manicured lawns like storm clouds racing across the sky. The sound of heavy engines filled the air, drowning out the whispered commentary that had dominated the ceremony moments before. Marcus stepped back further from the altar, his confidence evaporating as the mysterious sound grew louder. His face, which had been flushed with righteous anger, now paled with uncertainty. This was not part of his plan, not part of the clean break he had orchestrated to escape what he saw as a social mistake. 100 black government vehicles materialized around the wedding venue like a military operation unfolding with precision timing. Chevrolet Suburbans, tactical transport vehicles, and armored personnel carriers formed a perfect perimeter around the mansion grounds. Their tinted windows reflected the afternoon sun like dark mirrors, revealing nothing of the occupants within. The wedding guests pressed against the tall windows, their faces pale with confusion and growing fear. Congressman Sterling rose from his seat, his political instincts screaming warnings as he recognized the hallmarks of a federal operation. His wife Catherine clutched her pearls, her earlier satisfaction replaced by anxiety about what forces were converging on their family celebration. Helicopter rotors thundered overhead, their shadows flickering across the venue floor like the wings of enormous predatory birds. The sound was overwhelming, drowning out all conversation and reducing the assembled elite to stunned silence. These were not news helicopters or wedding photographers. These were military aircraft with a purpose that none of the guests could comprehend. Maria remained motionless at the altar, her simple white dress seeming to glow against the darkening atmosphere of the venue. While everyone else showed signs of panic or confusion, she stood with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout her public humiliation. Her dark eyes tracked the movement outside with an awareness that seemed almost supernatural. The photographer's camera continued clicking automatically, but now he was documenting something far more significant than a society wedding gone wrong. His professional instincts told him he was witnessing history in the making, though he had no idea what forces were about to be unleashed. Vanessa's smug satisfaction transformed into genuine fear as the magnitude of the unfolding situation became clear. Commander Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing presidents and generals. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have all judged a woman you know nothing about." He held up a folder, its edges worn, but bearing official seals that made Congressman Sterling's eyes widen with recognition. "This is the truth about Major Maria Rodriguez." He opened it, pulling out documents stamped with classifications that most civilians would never see. 5 years ago, she led a covert Marine unit in an extraction operation, saved over 200 soldiers, risked her life to pull them out of hell. He paused, letting the words sink in. But the report was buried, called a failure, and her name was erased to protect someone else's lies. The crowd shifted uneasily as the weight of his revelation settled over them like a suffocating blanket. Maria's eyes flicked to the folder, her breath catching for just a moment as memories she had tried to bury came flooding back. The sound of gunfire, the screams of wounded Marines, the impossible decision to lead a rescue mission into enemy territory. A woman in a blue shawl, her face lined with years of Washington social climbing, stood up trembling with indignation. "This is absurd," she said, clutching her designer purse. "If she's such a hero, why is she hiding in plain clothes, acting like a nobody? It's all too convenient." A few guests nodded, their doubts resurfacing despite the overwhelming evidence before them. Maria's hands paused on her scattered bouquet, her eyes meeting the woman's gaze with steady resolve. "Hiding," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "Or just living without needing your approval." The woman's face reddened, and she sat down abruptly, her purse slipping to the floor as the crowd's murmurs grew quieter. Commander Rodriguez continued his devastating revelation. The mission was classified beyond top secret. Major Rodriguez led her team into a valley controlled by insurgent forces to extract a downed reconnaissance unit. 200 Marines were pinned down by enemy fire with no hope of conventional rescue. She volunteered for a mission that military planners had deemed impossible. Marcus, finding his voice for the first time since the Marines arrived, pointed a shaking finger at Maria. "Hero, it's all fabricated. You're still nothing." The words rang hollow in the transformed atmosphere. His earlier confidence completely evaporated in the face of overwhelming evidence. The photographers leaned in closer, their cameras clicking rapidly as they documented the complete reversal of fortune unfolding before them. Headlines were already forming in their minds as they witnessed the destruction of Washington's social hierarchy by military truth. Commander Rodriguez's voice dropped to a tone that commanded absolute attention as he revealed the classified details that had been buried for 5 years. The Kandahar Valley extraction, codenamed Operation Phoenix Dawn. 200 Marines trapped by insurgent forces with no viable rescue options. Every conventional approach had failed, and time was running out. Major Rodriguez volunteered to lead a 12-person team through hostile territory that military intelligence had deemed impassable. She spent 14 hours moving through enemy-controlled terrain, evading patrol units, and coordinated ambushes designed to prevent any rescue attempt from succeeding. A memory flickered in Maria's mind, unbidden but vivid. She was younger, her uniform dusty and torn, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. The air had smelled of smoke and cordite, and she could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors struggling against mountain winds that threatened to tear them from the sky. The enemy had concentrated over 300 fighters in that valley, Commander Rodriguez continued. They knew American forces would attempt a rescue, and they were prepared to make it a massacre. What they didn't expect was Major Rodriguez's tactical innovation that turned their strength against them. She'd led her team through a network of caves that intelligence maps showed as impassable. For 6 hours, they crawled through spaces barely wide enough for human bodies, emerging behind enemy lines at the exact moment air support arrived to provide covering fire. Under her command, the rescue operation extracted all 200 Marines without a single friendly casualty. Enemy losses were estimated at over 100 fighters. It should have been the most celebrated Marine operation of the decade. The venue fell silent as the magnitude of Maria's sacrifice became clear. She had saved 200 American lives in a mission that military historians would later call impossible. But instead of recognition, her actions have been classified and buried to protect political interests that valued secrecy over heroism. Congressman Sterling's face was pale with recognition as he began to understand the forces arrayed against him. His corruption had contributed to the cover-up that buried Maria's heroic actions, trading American military honor for personal political gain and financial benefit through defense contracts. But the mission came at a cost, Commander Rodriguez said quietly. 3 Marines were killed during the extraction, and Major Rodriguez carried their bodies out personally, refusing to leave anyone behind. She was awarded the Navy Cross, but the citation was sealed to protect the classified nature of the operation. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the weight of those fallen Marines and the promise she had made to their families that their sacrifice would not be forgotten, even if the world never knew their names. The consequences came swiftly and mercilessly as the truth about Congressman Sterling's corruption spread through the venue like wildfire. Commander Rodriguez handed a thick folder to 2 federal agents who had materialized from the crowd of Marines, their badges gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. David Sterling, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The lead agent's voice cut through the stunned silence as handcuffs clicked around the congressman's wrists. Your defense contracts with Blackwater Industries were purchased with the blood money earned by burying Major Rodriguez's mission reports. Catherine Sterling collapsed into her chair, her pearls scattering across the marble floor as her husband was led away in disgrace. The political dynasty she had spent decades building crumbled in minutes, destroyed by the truth they had tried so hard to suppress through corruption and influence peddling. Marcus stood frozen in shock, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated as he watched his family's power structure collapse around him. The confident young man who had publicly humiliated Maria now faced social and financial ruin as his father's crimes became public knowledge, destroying their family name forever. Vanessa, who had mocked Maria throughout the engagement, tried to slip toward the exit, but found her path blocked by Marines who had positioned themselves at every door. Her designer dress and smug superiority meant nothing in the face of military justice and federal law enforcement. The wedding photographer continued documenting the extraordinary scene as Washington's elite realized they had gravely misjudged the quiet woman they had dismissed as a social climber. His images would become historical documents showing the moment when military honor triumphed over political corruption. Bradley, Marcus's best man and fellow conspirator in the Sterling family's legal machinations, found himself surrounded by federal agents who had been building cases against the entire network of corrupt officials and defense contractors who had profited from buried military operations. Commander Rodriguez's voice carried across the venue with devastating finality. The order to bury Major Rodriguez's mission came directly from Congressman Sterling. He profited from defense contracts tied to the failure narrative while 200 Marines' lives were saved by her courage and leadership. Maria didn't watch Sterling being led away in handcuffs. Her hand was steady as she picked up scattered rose petals from her bouquet, her dignity intact despite the chaos swirling around her. She had known this day would come eventually, when the truth could no longer be contained by political influence and corruption. The guests who had laughed at her background and mocked her worthiness now sat in stunned silence, understanding that they had witnessed the destruction of one of Washington's most powerful families by a woman whose heroism they had never suspected or respected. As the chaos of Sterling's arrest continued around them, a figure emerged from the formation of Marines that had transformed the wedding venue into a military tribunal. The man walked with purpose through the crowd, his dress blue uniform bearing the scars of recent combat operations, his face weathered but unmistakably familiar. Maria's breath caught as recognition flooded through her like lightning. Her hand dropped the scattered rose petals she had been collecting, and for the first time since Marcus's cruel rejection, genuine emotion flickered across her composed features. Carlos Martinez stepped forward, removing his white dress cap to reveal the face she had mourned for 5 years. His dark eyes held the same intensity, she remembered, but now they carried the weight of missions completed in shadows and battles fought in places that didn't officially exist on any military map. The crowd fell silent as they witnessed something far more powerful than political corruption or social humiliation. This was a reunion forged in blood and sacrifice, a love that had survived death itself and the brutal machinery of classified military operations. "I never left you," Carlos said, his voice low but carrying easily through the transformed venue. "I lived in the shadows to finish the mission we started together." The words carried the weight of 5 years spent in deep cover, completing operations that officially never happened while she believed him dead. Maria's eyes filled with tears for the first time since the ceremony began, her military composure finally cracking in the face of impossible joy. The woman who had stood unmoved through public humiliation and political revelation now trembled as the man she loved approached with steady steps. "Carlos," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly as years of carefully controlled grief finally found release. The guests watched in stunned silence as they realized they were witnessing something far more significant than a society wedding gone wrong. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his scarred fingers, and spoke words that had waited 5 years to be heard. "Major Rodriguez, will you marry a Marine who kept his promise to come home, even when the world thought he was dead?" The assembled Marines raised their sabers in perfect unison, creating a gleaming arch of steel and honor above the couple who had found each other again despite impossible odds and classified operations that had torn them apart. Marcus and his family's humiliation was complete as they witnessed the reunion of two warriors whose love had survived death, betrayal, and the cruel machinery of Washington politics. The woman he had rejected as having no future was embracing a man who had literally returned from the dead to claim her. The final confrontations unfolded with the precision of a military operation as justice swept through Riverside Gardens like an unstoppable force. Congressman Sterling was led past the assembled wedding guests in handcuffs, his political career destroyed by the evidence of corruption that had buried Maria's heroic service record. Federal agents moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, arresting defense contractors and political operatives who had profited from the conspiracy to hide Operation Phoenix Dawn. The Sterling family's web of corruption unraveled completely as 5 years of hidden crimes came to light in devastating succession. Marcus stood alone near the altar where he had publicly humiliated Maria, his confident rejection now revealed as the desperate act of a weak man from a criminal family. His face was pale with shock as he watched everything he had taken for granted disappear in handcuffs and federal indictments. Catherine Sterling wept openly as she realized her social standing was destroyed forever. The woman who had looked down on Maria as unworthy now faced public disgrace as the wife of a corrupt congressman who had betrayed American Marines for personal profit and political advancement. Vanessa, who had spread cruel gossip about Maria's background, found herself surrounded by reporters who were far more interested in documenting the Sterling family's downfall than listening to her desperate attempts to distance herself from the scandal that would dominate headlines for months. Bradley, the best man who had supported Marcus's cruel rejection, was arrested as a co-conspirator in the defense contracting fraud that had made the Sterling family wealthy while hiding the truth about Maria's classified mission and the lives she had saved. Commander Rodriguez addressed the stunned wedding guests with military authority that brooked no argument. Major Rodriguez's service record speaks for itself. 200 Marines are alive today because of her courage. The truth has been hidden long enough by corrupt politicians who valued money over honor. The photographer's camera captured the moment when social hierarchy collapsed completely, when Washington's elite realized they had mocked and dismissed a genuine American hero whose sacrifices had saved hundreds of lives in classified operations they could never comprehend. Maria stood with Carlos, her hand in his, as they watched justice finally being served after 5 years of lies and cover-up. The quiet dignity she had maintained throughout her public humiliation now seemed prophetic as the truth vindicated everything she had silently endured. The Marines maintained perfect formation as federal agents completed their arrests, their presence a reminder that some institutions still honored courage and sacrifice over political convenience and social climbing. The transformation of Riverside Gardens was complete as Maria Rodriguez walked down the aisle with Carlos Martinez, no longer the humiliated bride abandoned at the altar, but a decorated Marine officer whose honor had been restored by the truth that could no longer be suppressed by corruption. 1,000 Marines stood at attention, their sabers raised in perfect formation, creating a gleaming corridor of steel and respect through which the reunited couple passed with dignity that no amount of money or political influence could purchase. The sound of their boots on marble echoed like thunder through the venue. Commander Rodriguez presented Maria with a Navy cross that had been hidden in classified files for 5 years, its ribbon gleaming under the crystal chandeliers as he pinned it to her simple white dress. Major Rodriguez, your service to this nation and the Marines under your command will never be forgotten again. The wedding guests who had mocked her background and questioned her worthiness now stood in stunned silence, many weeping as they realized they had witnessed the complete vindication of a woman whose quiet strength had weathered their cruelest attacks with unshakable dignity. Carlos took Maria's hand as they reached the end of the aisle, his fingers intertwining with hers as he spoke the words that had waited 5 years to be heard. I promised I would come home to you, and I kept that promise despite everything that tried to keep us apart. The photographer captured the moment when love triumphed over betrayal, when military honor defeated political corruption, when 2 warriors who had served their country with distinction finally claimed the happiness that had been stolen from them by classified operations and buried truth. Outside, helicopters lifted off into the afternoon sky, carrying federal prisoners to face justice for their crimes against the Marines whose lives Maria had saved and whose service she had honored even when the world forgot their sacrifice through political convenience and defense contract corruption. The Marines began filing out in perfect formation, their mission complete, leaving behind a transformed venue where social hierarchy had collapsed under the weight of revealed truth and authentic heroism that transcended Washington's shallow values and corrupt priorities. Maria and Carlos stood together in the empty venue, surrounded by scattered rose petals and the echoes of justice finally served. The quiet woman who had been dismissed as nobody was revealed as somebody whose courage had saved hundreds of lives in places where freedom was purchased with blood. The story would spread through military communities and beyond, becoming legend among those who understood that true strength often wears the mask of humility, and that the greatest heroes are those who serve without seeking recognition.